Renee Carson had always carried herself with confidence. At 43, with a solid career in strategic marketing and more professional poise than most executives twice her age, she didn't second-guess herself often. But that morning, as she parked her gray Acura in the underground garage of a sleek glass-paneled building in downtown Austin, her hands paused on the steering wheel for just a moment longer than usual. She stared ahead, took one deep breath, and then gathered her leather folder. Smoothly, she straightened her navy blazer, stepped out of the car, and entered the elevator. The click of her heels echoed in the quiet lobby, a sound she knew too well, one that spoke of someone who had come prepared for anything. She was overprepared. Her resume was airtight, her references solid, and she had been practicing mock interviews for weeks. This interview at Bradford Keenan & Associates was more than just a job opportunity. It was her chance to re-enter the workforce after nearly 2 years away to care for her father. It was her chance to prove that she wasn't just someone who took a break, but someone who had been sharpening her skills during that time. As she entered the lobby, she was greeted with the cold, impersonal atmosphere typical of large corporate buildings. The white walls, sharp lighting, and modern art that said nothing at all seemed to reflect a lack of warmth in the air. Behind the reception desk sat a young woman, her face powdered, her ponytail glossy, and her eyes scanning Renee's body with a hint of disdain, as if she didn't belong there. Renee smiled warmly, breaking the silence. "Good morning. I'm here for the 10 a.m. interview with Elaine Beckman." The receptionist blinked, almost startled by her warmth. She tapped a few keys on her computer and glanced at her screen. "You're Renee Carson, yes?" There was a pause before she picked up the desk phone. Her voice dropped into something hushed, and her eyes never left Renee. After a brief exchange, the receptionist put the phone down, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Someone will be right out." Renee thanked her and sat down on a gray bench near the glass wall. She checked her watch, 9:52, early as always. She looked around. No one else was waiting, no staff moving with any sense of urgency, just silence and cold air. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. At 10:07, a tall man in a slate suit stepped out from a frosted glass hallway. He didn't acknowledge Renee right away. When he finally did, his face registered polite surprise, as though he had been expecting someone else. "Renee Carson?" She stood. "Yes," she said confidently. "I'm Devin Marks, Director of Marketing. I'll be sitting in with Elaine today." Devin didn't shake her hand. He just turned and gestured down the hallway, offering no small talk, no greeting, just the squeaky sound of his shoes on the polished floor as Renee followed him. No "how was your drive?" No inquiries about her day. She was just another candidate, an afterthought. When they arrived at the meeting room, Elaine Beckman was sitting at the table with her laptop open, glasses perched low on her nose. She didn't stand. "Let's get started," Elaine said, her tone curt. The questions came rapid fire, but not the kind Renee expected. "Are you sure this is a role you applied for? How familiar are you with client-facing tech? Have you worked in an office this size before?" At one point, Elaine raised an eyebrow when Renee described handling international accounts. "International? From where exactly?" Elaine asked dismissively. "Singapore, Toronto, Frankfurt." Renee answered, her patience starting to wear thin, but she kept her composure. After 15 minutes, Devin closed his notebook and looked up at her. "Actually, it looks like there's been a miscommunication. This position was filled internally last night." He said it flatly with no apology. "Apologies for the inconvenience." Before Renee could speak, Elaine added, "We'll keep your resume on file." They stood. No handshake. No escort. Just a quiet gesture toward the door. Renee walked back to the lobby. The receptionist was already on the phone, pretending not to notice her. She stepped into the elevator alone, feeling the weight of the past few minutes settle in. Not one person thanked her for coming. No one even acknowledged her as she left. The silence felt deafening, and yet Renee had no idea how wrong they were. Upstairs, on the 10th floor of the same sleek building, behind a wall of tinted glass, Julian Maris stood completely still. He hadn't moved since the receptionist picked up the phone, his posture stiff as he watched everything unfold in real time. From his vantage point, He saw how the receptionist's eyes narrowed as she looked Renee up and down, then saw how Devin adjusted his tie the moment he spotted her. He watched every word of the conversation. Everything filtered to the live audio feed in the observation suite. Julian had already known what he was walking into when he made the decision to acquire Bradford Keenan and Associates. 3 days earlier, he had finalized the acquisition of the company quietly and deliberately. No press announcements, no fanfare. It hadn't been public knowledge yet, and he had deliberately chosen not to inform anyone about the merger immediately. He wanted to see how people would react when they had no idea who was in the room. And today, the truth was unfolding before his eyes. He stood, hands behind his back, jaw tight as he listened intently. Every word, every glance exchanged between the interviewers, and Renee sent a message he couldn't ignore. The subtle dismissiveness, the snide undertones of the questions. They were unmistakable. "Play back the last 2 minutes," Julian said flatly. A junior legal analyst named Leanne tapped a few keys, and the dialogue began to repeat, echoing to the discreet speakers in the room. Julian's expression didn't change as he listened, but the air seemed to thicken with the weight of what was being revealed. Elaine's tone, Devin's indifferent attitude, the way they had completely cut Renee off when she mentioned handling international accounts. It all hit Julian like a series of blows to the gut. The casual way they had dismissed her, written her off without a second glance, was all too familiar. He stood still for a moment, letting the weight of it settle in before he turned to the panel on the wall and pressed a button. "I want HR in my office at 11:30, he ordered calmly, his voice flat. Leanne hesitated for a second. "Which HR manager, sir?" "All of them," Julian replied. "All of them." The assistant on the other end of the line paused for a beat before confirming, "Yes, sir." Julian's gaze shifted outside the window, watching Austin shimmer under the late morning sun. The city below him was bustling, filled with people who had no idea that a monumental change was about to take place inside the building. He wasn't angry, not in the traditional sense. He wasn't even frustrated. It was more like a confirmation, a puzzle piece falling right into place. He had suspected something like this might happen, and now that he had seen it firsthand, he knew exactly what to do. He texted Renee, "Heading home soon. Don't go anywhere just yet." The message had no punctuation, a telltale sign that he was focused on something else. He understood that tone well. As he made his way to the elevator, he took a deep breath. Renee would need a moment to process everything. She had just walked out of the interview room feeling the weight of what had transpired. But Julian knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped inside and leaned against the wall, eyes closed for a moment as the building's quiet hum filled the space around him. He wasn't angry. He had already known this would happen. But what he didn't know was how the company would react to the reset that was coming. He already had his plan in motion. What he didn't expect was how quickly the cracks would start to show. By the time Julian reached the parking garage, he could feel the shift inside himself. He wasn't angry anymore. He was resolute. It was clear to him that the situation had escalated beyond a simple interview mishap. What had started as a personal affront to Renee had turned into an institutional reflection of bias and systemic issues that could no longer be ignored. As he reached his car, he could already picture what would happen next. The storm he was about to unleash was necessary. Renee's treatment was not an isolated incident. It was indicative of something deeper that needed to be uprooted. Renee had her own moment of stillness, but in the car, as she started the engine, she felt the weight of the silence pressing down on her. The confidence she had walked in with that morning felt like it belonged to someone else now. But even as she sat there, she knew something had changed. There was no anger, no rash decision-making, just clarity. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed the same composed woman who had walked into that building, but now there was an edge to her gaze that hadn't been there before. She had not only been dismissed, she had been exposed, and she wasn't about to let that exposure go to waste. As she drove through the garage and out onto the street, her phone buzzed with Julian's text. "Heading home soon. Don't go anywhere just yet." The words were simple, but they sent a ripple of understanding through her. Julian had been watching. He hadn't just been protecting her. He had been orchestrating something bigger. She didn't know the full picture yet, But she knew Julian well enough to understand that he was setting a stage for something far more significant than just a corporate shuffle. Back at the office, Devin Marks was halfway through his tuna sandwich when his phone lit up with a notification. He glanced at it, reading the message from internal comms. Mandatory HR meeting, 11:30 sharp, 10th floor boardroom. Attendance required. He blinked, checked the sender, then looked at the time. He immediately called Elaine. "Did you get that invite?" he asked, his voice thick with confusion. Down the hall, Elaine Beckman was adjusting her blouse in the reflection of a large window. She didn't turn around as she replied, "Yeah, came through 10 minutes ago. Any idea what it's about?" Devin shrugged. Probably just another update about merger paperwork or something. But across the building, in a locked boardroom, Julian was already preparing to turn the tide. He stood in the corner, arms folded, his expression unreadable, but his mind was already calculating the next move. The door opened, and in walked Devin Marks and Elaine, still chatting casually about a client misprint. But when they saw the setup, the room, the silence, they froze. No projector, no agenda, no paperwork. Just Julian. He didn't say anything at first. The silence hung heavy in the room, and the tension was palpable. He let them stew in it for a few moments before speaking. "I want HR in here." "Rosa, go ahead," Julian said, his voice calm and measured. Rosa, the HR manager, opened a folder and pulled out a stack of transcripts. "These are excerpts from this morning's interview session with one of our external candidates." She began, her voice neutral. Elaine blinked. "Wait, what?" "That interview was canceled," she said, her voice rising slightly. Rosa shook her head. "It wasn't canceled. We have a full record, including audio and video, of the interaction. As per our new protocol under the company's equity review policy, we review every interview that is conducted." Devin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face flushing. "Look, we didn't mean any harm. It was just a misread. It happens all the time." Julian cut him off. "Happens to who?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. The entire room felt the weight of his words. He didn't wait for them to answer. Instead, he continued, his voice steady but unwavering. "You both had a chance to evaluate a candidate who met every qualification listed in your posting. In fact, she exceeded several of them. But instead of conducting a fair interview, you questioned her credentials, doubted her experience, and dismissed her with a smile. 'We'll keep your resume on file,' was your parting phrase." The silence in the room deepened. Elaine opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. "Do we have a camera angle on the front desk?" Julian asked, his gaze shifting toward Leanne. She nodded. "Good. I want a full copy of this interaction, audio and video, time-stamped and logged. I'll have it sent to your office in 20 minutes, Julian instructed, his tone unwavering. As Julian walked out of the boardroom, he knew the power shift had already begun. The corporate culture at Bradford Keenan was about to be overhauled. What had once been a good old boys club was now about to become a company where accountability and transparency were the new norms. He texted Renee, "I'll be home soon. Don't leave just yet." She didn't respond right away, and he knew that she needed time to process everything. But he also knew that she wouldn't let this go. She was as committed to change as he was. Renee's phone buzzed again as she sat in her car, ready to head out. She didn't answer it immediately. Instead, she turned the key in the ignition and started the car. The early confidence that had propelled her forward that morning now felt like a distant memory. She wasn't angry, but there was a new kind of clarity that had settled in her mind. She wasn't just walking away from an interview. She was walking away from a system that had already decided her worth before she had even entered the room. But the difference now was that she knew her worth, and she wasn't about to let anyone dismiss her again. As she drove through the streets of Austin, the city's landscape blurring past her window, her thoughts remained clear. She wasn't going to settle for being underestimated anymore. And, as she would soon find out, neither was Julian.